this is Dave. I am the game master of the Rad Rules Fallout Tabletop RPG podcast. Joining me today is my dear friend, player, and sometimes GM of Rad Rules, Jared Bailey. How you doing, buddy?
Not bad. Thanks for having me.
I'm happy to have you here. Today, we wanted to kind of give you a little bit of a rules cast. This is going to be kind of casual. We're going to be doing some talking about the rules, giving you kind of a setup of how to play a Fallout TTRPG. This is the only Fallout TTRPG, unless you homebrew something. But this is by Modifius. This is kind of going over their book, their rules, some of our own thoughts on the rules, own thoughts on equipment, enemies, tips and tricks, that kind of stuff. It's not a bulleted necessarily format, but it will be a great conversation and may give you some ideas in the future about running your own game and doing your own thing. I'm going to hand the first kind of basic question off to you, Jared. So, what exactly is a TTRPG?
Oh, wow, we're going to start strong here. So,
yeah,
TTRPG is an abbreviation for tabletop role-playing game. So, role-playing game is any type of game in which you play the role of a character. It could be a self-insert. It could be something fantastic. It could be something low and pitiful, and anything in between. Usually, tabletop RPGs have some type of rule system that help you decide whether your actions succeed or fail, and then the story progresses based off of those results. For a lot of people, when they think tabletop RPGs, they think about like Dungeons and Dragons, and most recently like 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons, and those use dice and a character sheet to kind of help with your decision making, whether or not the action you took succeeded or failed, or just how well you did or just how poorly you did. Some games don't use dice. Some games may use cards. They may use spinners. They may just require some interpretation of the narrative and what makes the most sense. But tabletop RPGs really spanned a very large array of rule sets and stories and environments, settings. It's pretty broad.
I think that's a great overview of it. How did you get started in TTRPGs?
So probably my introduction to role-playing games in general would have been video games. So, the Final Fantasy series, we just talked about that a little bit a while ago. The Phantasy Star series that was on like Sega Genesis.
Yeah, Phantasy Star 4, that's where it's at.
Yeah, Chrono Trigger, all the Square and Square Enix, all those like RPGs that came, that's sort of what gave me that inspiration, just for these fantastic stories. I've got characters with different statistics that are better at some things and worse at other things. And then, Fallout or the Elder Scrolls games. So I think Morrowind was the first one I picked up when I had my Xbox. So, that was a really deep dive into sort of like a stats heavy game. And Fallout 3 was another one that I had picked up for my 360. And then about 10 years ago, it was about 10 years ago, I was introduced to Pathfinder. So our local area has a really good Pathfinder Society Lodge, and I was introduced to Pathfinder through their organized play campaign. And from there, I found a game that I could drop in one day a week on a Sunday, and it didn't have to be the same people every single time. I could just bring my character, and I could play, and I could do this on a weekly basis, and that sort of transitioned me into being comfortable enough to try to run the game once I'd learned the rules a bit better. And then once I got comfortable with that game system, I started branching out to other game systems. And now I've got a full bookshelf of different RPGs and stuff that I've read and learned from and cherry pick from when I want to run stuff. And, it's that's kind of been my background. I started very small, tangentially related to tabletop RPGs, then expanded, got mastery into one system, and then expanded out. And a lot of those lessons that I learned from Pathfinder and Pathfinder Society translate very well to other games, just like the Fallout 2d20 system. And that's my rough background.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And you mentioned about having the books. It's like once you get invested in this hobby, you tend to just collect books. That's just like a part of the repertoire a little bit. Is you just have either too many PDFs or books in some regard. Kind of my start with it was like you was with video games. I think I was a big Dragon Quest fan for a while, and then got started with some more 3D stuff. I started with Knights of the Old Republic and Knights of the Old Republic 2, and then I was like, okay, well, who makes these games? And so it was BioWare was the first one, in Obsidian. I was like, well, let me play some of their other stuff, and that's where I got introduced to Neverwinter and Neverwinter 2. Which are I think Neverwinter 2. I want to go back and play sometime because that's just a really good D&D game. From there, I really played a bunch of video games, Elder Scrolls, Fallout, Dragon Age is probably good in between the original stuff, and now Final Fantasy. And then a few years ago, I had a friend group that was like, we should play D&D. It's like we should do this and just figure it out. We know absolutely nothing about them, and ended up DMing a few sessions, and then I was like, well, that's pretty fun. I like doing that. So we've kept on doing that and kept on. It's a different DM this time because my time is now spent GMing a different podcast rather than trying to build two worlds at once. I'm now just building one world, which is nice. But I decided, I was like, there's something about Fallout, which Fallout is a series that a post-apocalyptic RPG that came out, I think, in the late 80s, early 90s. It was a computer RPG, so it was like top down. You were looking tactically, you were filling out skills. Kind of in the late 2000s, it came out as a 3D game where it was like a first-person shooter. Still had a lot of that RPG mechanics. That's what kind of made it big. Fallout 3, Fallout New Vegas, and Fallout 4. I think the trio of those games made it what it is. I think that between those four, there's probably a favorite for people that they will ride or die by. I got started doing a podcast based on their multiplayer game, Fallout 76, which is set in West Virginia, which is where we're both from. And I thought, what, this is fun. I wonder if there's like a tabletop RPG that is like Fallout. And so I went through, read some Monster of the Week, read some Apocalypse, some of those Powered by the Apocalypse games. Kind of got inspired by that, and then found that Modifius had just released a Fallout RPG with their own unique 2d20 system, and decided, it was like, let's play a game that's going to be different from most like regular tabletop games. Our games are a little bit different from like when you actually sit down to play. Combat's a little faster. We're really like focused on dialogue and having discussions. Like there's a lot less, I think, of that chuff you get when you hang out with friends and have a drink and a snack and you're just like all together. Like we record in 2 to 3 hour sessions. Most of my days where I am, sit down and I play D&D with a group, it's like, hey, come over for lunch, and we're all just hanging out pretty much until dinner time, and then we all go home. But this game, we're going to kind of go through and kind of teach you how some of the basics, really, and talk about our experience with that.